Judge Boseberg signed multiple orders. I'm holding one of them in my hand. That's his signature at the bottom. Ordering the phone companies who had been subpoenaed not to disclose to the members of the Senate and the members of the House that their phone records had been subpoenaed.
You are not going to believe what happened in this Senate hearing. A federal judge is actually facing potential impeachment after getting absolutely grilled for allegedly targeting political opponents. Ted Cruz brought the receipts, and it gets intense. Watch this.
Judge Boseberg signed multiple orders. I'm holding one of them in my hand. That's his signature at the bottom. Ordering the phone companies who had been subpoenaed not to disclose to the members of the Senate and the members of the House that their phone records had been subpoenaed. As you noted in your testimony, that order is directly contrary to federal statute. Congress in 2004 made it illegal for a phone company to disclose a senator's phone records without notifying the senator in question. Is there any basis for a judge to disregard unambiguous federal statutory language?
Absolutely not.
Judge Boasberg signed an order that says, quote, "The court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure, in other words, informing the senators their phone records had been subpoenaed, will result in the destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation." Is there any conceivable basis for Judge Boasberg signing that, particularly given Jack Smith's testimony now that Judge Boasberg had no idea whose phone records he was signing off on?
I've been struggling for the last few weeks to come up with one, but I can't.
Did the targets of surveillance know about this?
No, but I would also remind...
Could the senators whose records were subpoenaed contrary to federal law appeal it?
So, no, but of course, Judge Boasberg didn't know, first, that these were senators, second, that
and nor did he, Professor Vladeck, nor did he inquire. And in fact, I'm going to go back to Professor Luther's statement, because in an ordinary circumstance, a judge entering an order that he doesn't know who it's applying to, he doesn't know any facts, he doesn't know anything, on the ordinary basis, you'd say, yeah, there's zero basis, in fact, but there is actually an explanation for why he did so. Because Judge Boasberg did know one thing. He knew that Jack Smith was a partisan Democrat engaged in an effort to go after Donald Trump, that he was subpoenaing over 400 Republicans. So the one thing he knew is all of these targets were Republicans. So the only conceivable basis for Judge Boasberg signing these orders one after the other is an animus that says every Republican on planet Earth, every American who voted for Donald Trump, there is reasonable basis to believe they are criminals.
Senator,
I'm done with your question.
I'm sorry.
There is no other basis for his signing that order. He knew that. He knew Jack Smith. Welcome to the fast food counter at McDonald's. Whatever you want, all the fries you want, I will sign, ordered. That is perfectly fine if you are the chairman of the DNC. Being a partisan hack, or for that matter, the chairman of the RNC, either side can be partisan hacks. Judges are expected not to be.
Okay, let's just pause and unpack that, because the gravity of what Senator Cruz is laying out is honestly staggering. We're talking about a federal judge signing off on seizing the phone records of sitting U.S. senators, specifically Republicans, without them knowing. Cruz points out that Congress explicitly made that illegal back in 2004, and yet here we have a judge bypassing that protection. The witness's admission that there's essentially no basis for ignoring that statute is damning. What's even wilder is the implication Cruz makes about the reasonableness standard. The judge essentially signed an order saying that simply telling these senators about the subpoena would result in them destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses. Think about that. He's putting elected officials in the same category as flight risk criminals. It paints a picture of a judiciary that isn't just interpreting the law, but actively participating in political warfare. If a judge can just rubber stamp a surveillance request on the legislative branch based on what looks like pure partisan animus, then the separation of powers is in serious trouble. Cruz is essentially arguing that this isn't just an error in judgment. It's a calculated move to weaponize the bench.
Judge Boseberg was acting on his preconceived belief that the Trump administration would not follow court orders. Although he lacked authority to do so, he issued a temporary restraining order preventing the government from removing violent Tren de Agua terrorists, which the Supreme Court, by the way, summarily vacated shortly thereafter. Not only that, he forced his way onto the case. In the dead of night, while he's on vacation, Judge Boseberg abused his power as chief judge to force himself onto that case. Judge Boasberg doesn't judge cases involving President Trump impartially. He has made it clear time and time again in his rulings and his comments that he, instead of wearing that black robe, wears, in fact, a blue jersey. He has continually abused the power as chief judge in 5 separate ways. 1, forcing himself onto hot-button cases. 2, abusing his power in the judicial conference to fear-monger to the judiciary about the specter of a non-existent constitutional crisis. 3, rubber-stamped gag orders on subpoenas against U.S. senators. 4, trying to hold DOJ lawyers in contempt for a case the Supreme Court said he had no jurisdiction over. And 5, he sits on the Circuit Judicial Council, which would be able to overturn any disciplinary action taken against him, interestingly. Article 3 has not policed itself. That's the reality. We have to be able to check a rogue judge through the impeachment process, and I don't say that lightly. The House must exercise that power. As Roberts said, you don't impeach judges you disagree with. You get them overturned on appeal. With Judge Boasberg, this is not about disagreeing with some interpretation of the law. Judge Boasberg has abused his role as chief judge, which are non-appealable ministerial acts. He is a rogue judge. The House should vote to impeach Judge Boasberg based on the articles they have before them. Once the House impeaches, we should hold a trial and hold Judge Boasberg accountable.
Thank you, Senator Schmitt. As I referenced earlier, with no objection, I will introduce into the record, number 1, Judge Boasberg's order. Number 2, my letter urging Speaker Johnson to advance pending articles of impeachment against both Judge Boasberg and Judge Boardman.
This timeline Senator Schmitt is presenting is absolutely brutal. It moves the conversation from just bad rulings to actual procedural abuse. The allegation that Boasberg forced himself onto specific cases while on vacation, using his power as chief judge to cherry-pick sensitive political cases, is a huge red flag. Usually, case assignment is random to ensure fairness, but if he's intervening to steer the outcome, that destroys the whole concept of impartiality. And notice the pattern Schmitt describes, from blocking deportations contrary to Supreme Court precedent to gagging senators. It suggests a judge who views himself as above the appellate process. Schmitt makes a powerful point when he says, Article 3 has not policed itself. That is the core of the constitutional crisis here. If the judiciary won't check its own rogue actors, the legislature has to step in with impeachment. It's a rare and extreme step, but when you have a judge allegedly acting as a political operative in a robe, ignoring the Supreme Court's jurisdiction, the standard remedies like appeals just don't cut it anymore. They are building a case here that this isn't about legal interpretation. It's about abuse of power.
On this vote, the yeas are 163, the nays are 257, with 1 present. The amendment is not adopted.
Hey everybody, Tim Burchett leaving the House floor in total disgust. Chip Roy's amendment to reduce the District of Columbia Appeals Court funding by 20% and strike the salary and expenses funding of Judge Boseberg and Boardman's staff. And you know that bunch, what they've been pulling is ridiculous. They've in my opinion, they've completely got out of whack with what's going on. The next one was my buddy Eli Crane, Navy SEAL, unbelievable guy, one of my favorites up here. He prohibits funding for the National Endowment for Democracy. And that was, I forget how many millions of dollars, and that didn't pass. I'm so frustrated with this bunch up here. And then, of course, the big bill, it cost $90.1 billion. And guess what? It passed because it had all that garbage in there. It sends $1.425 billion to Egypt, and then we're going to give Jordan build them a wall, and they're firing missiles at other people. What the hell, folks? Excuse my language. $6.15 billion for foreign military financing program. And yeah, they're going to come back and say, oh, they're going to buy a bunch of arms from us. Well, my mama used to say, I don't like making my living off of suffering of others, and that's just pathetic. I don't know. I'm just disgusted with it.
And this is where the rubber meets the road, and honestly, where a lot of people lose faith in the system. After all that evidence, after the hearings, after the proven overreach, the vote to simply defund this specific judge's office fails. And it fails because nearly 50 Republicans crossed the aisle to save the funding. You can hear the genuine disgust in Tim Burchett's voice. He's calling out his own colleagues for complaining about the weaponized government on cable news, but then refusing to use the power of the purse, which is their main constitutional tool, to actually stop it. It's the classic uniparty dynamic he's describing. It's one thing to have Democrats support a Democrat judge, but when Republicans won't even vote to cut the salary of a judge who allegedly targeted them, it makes you wonder if the outrage is just for show. Burchett is right to be frustrated. If Congress won't use its checkbook to rein in a rogue judiciary, then all those fiery committee speeches we just watched are effectively meaningless theater. It's a chaotic situation in D.C. right now. What do you think? Should judges be impeached for this kind of behavior, or is that going too far? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more breakdowns like this.